She wanted a fast $4,000 for the slot machines. She got a felony record, a set of steel handcuffs, and a view of her neighbors watching her leave in the back of a squad car. If you want to know how I turned a forged signature into her eviction notice, stay with me until the end. My name is Sarah, I'm 24 years old, and up until this happened, I was an ICU nurse working 60 hours a week just to keep the lights on in a house I didn't even own. And honestly, standing there on the front lawn while the red and blue police lights swept across the vinyl siding of our house, I didn't feel like a winner. I didn't feel that rush of victory you see in movies. I just felt heavy, like my bones were made of lead. And I'm watching my own mother, the woman who used to braid my hair and make me soup when I was sick, being guided into the back of a cruiser by an officer who looked younger than me. And she isn't looking at the ground in shame, you know? She's looking right at me. And even though I can't hear her through the glass, I know exactly what she's screaming. She's screaming that I'm ungrateful. She's screaming that I owe her this. Basically, she was still trying to manipulate me even while her wrists were zip-tied behind her back. But before we get to the sirens and the neighbors staring from behind their curtains, we have to rewind. Because this didn't just happen out of nowhere. It wasn't like I woke up one day and decided to destroy my mother. This was a slow burn. A really slow, painful burn that started years ago. You have to understand, my mom wasn't always like this. And that's the part that hurts the most, right? If she had been a monster my whole life, it would have been easy to cut her off. But I have these memories, these ghost memories, I call them, of her before the addiction took over. I remember when I was 16, she taught me how to parallel park in the empty high school lot. She was so patient. We were laughing, eating soft-serve ice cream, and she told me she was proud of the woman I was becoming. I hold on to that memory so tight, because looking at her now, it feels like that version of her died. Somewhere along the line, the fun trips to the casino turned into solitary confinement with her iPad. The laughter stopped. The house got quieter. And the smell of baking was replaced by this permanent, stale odor of cheap wine and that weird, metallic scent of anxiety. Have you ever realized that the person supposed to protect you is actually the one holding the door open for the wolf? Because that's what it felt like living with her. I was the wolf's dinner, and the wolf was her gambling app. By the time I graduated nursing school, the dynamic had shifted completely. I wasn't her daughter anymore. I was a resource. I was a walking, talking ATM machine that she had invested in for 18 years and now expected a return on. I was working the night shift in the ICU, dealing with life and death, trauma, coding patients, just absolute chaos for 12 hours straight. And I would come home, exhausted, smelling like antiseptic and death, just wanting to sleep. And the first thing she would say to me wasn't, "How was your shift?" or, "Are you okay?" It was always about money. Always. It started small. "Can you cover the electric bill this month? I'm a little short. I need $20 for gas." And being the good daughter, being the one who remembered the ice cream and the driving lessons, I said yes. I always said yes. I mean, she's my mom, right? You help family. That's what we're told. But then the requests got bigger, and the lies got sloppier. She'd say she needed money for a prescription, but I'd find the pharmacy receipt in the trash for a fraction of the cost. She'd say the water heater broke, but when I called the plumber, he'd say he never came out. And so, my life became this constant state of defense. I started hiding my purse. I changed the passwords on my bank accounts. I literally bought a lock for my bedroom door because I'd come home and find my drawers rummaged through. The only thing that kept me sane was my car. It wasn't anything fancy, just a 2020 Honda Civic, slate gray. But to me, that car was a Rolls-Royce. It was the first thing I ever bought with my own money, completely on my own. No cosigner. Just my name on the title. I worked 3 jobs during nursing school to save the down payment. That car represented my freedom. It was my escape pod. When the house got too suffocating, or when Mom's passive-aggressive comments about how I thought I was better than her got too loud, I could just get in my Civic, turn up the music, and drive. It was the only place in the world where nobody wanted anything from me. It was the only place where I was just Sarah, not the nurse, or the ungrateful daughter. I kept that car pristine. I'm talking detailing it every weekend, oil changes on the dot. It was my baby. And obviously, Mom knew that. She knew that car was my lifeline to work. Without it, I couldn't get to the hospital. The public transit in our area is a joke, a 2-hour commute for a 20-minute drive. If I lost the car, I lost the job. If I lost the job, I lost everything. And honestly, looking back, I think she resented that car. She resented that I had something nice that she couldn't gamble away. She resented that I had a way to leave. The physical toll of living like this was brutal. I wasn't sleeping. My hair was falling out in clumps in the shower from the cortisol spikes. I developed this twitch in my left eye that wouldn't go away. I walked around with this constant knot in my stomach, just waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know that feeling when you're walking on ice and you hear a crack? That was my entire existence at home. I remember one night specifically, about a week before the event. I came home from a particularly brutal shift. We lost a teenager in the ER, and I was just emotionally hollow. I walked into the kitchen, and Mom was sitting at the table with her phone. The distinct ding-ding-ding of a slot machine app was the only sound in the house. She didn't even look up. She just said, "We're out of milk." Not, "Hello." Not, "I love you." Just a demand. And I'm standing there, still in my scrubs, staring at the back of her head, and I had this moment of clarity. I realized that the mother I was grieving, the one who taught me to park, wasn't just gone. She had been consumed. The person in front of me was an addict who would burn me alive if it meant she could stay warm for 5 more minutes. But even then, even with that realization, I never thought she would go as far as she did. I thought there were lines she wouldn't cross. I thought there was a floor to the basement. I was wrong. There is no floor. There is only deeper digging. It was a Tuesday, a regular Tuesday. I had a double shift scheduled, 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. I left the house before the sun came up. The car was running fine. I remember looking at the odometer and thinking I needed to schedule a tire rotation soon. Long story short, the shift was hell. We were short-staffed, 3 admissions back-to-back. By the time I clocked out, my feet were throbbing so bad I could hear my heartbeat in my toes. All I wanted was to get in my car, blast the heater, and drive home to my locked bedroom. I walked out to the parking garage, level 3, spot 4B. That was my spot. I always parked there because it was near the camera. I turned the corner, keys in hand, ready to unlock the door. And I stop. Because spot 4B is empty. My first instinct wasn't anger. It wasn't even suspicion. It was confusion. I literally pressed the panic button on my key fob, thinking maybe I parked on level 2 by mistake. I walked up and down the rows, pressing the button, waiting for the beep. Silence. The garage was dead silent. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights. And then, the cold set in. Not the temperature, the internal cold. The kind that starts in your gut and spreads to your fingertips. My hands started shaking so hard I dropped my keys. Because I knew. Deep down, I knew. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I stood there in the empty parking spot, looking at a small oil stain on the concrete where my car used to be, and I felt the world tilt. She hadn't just taken the car for a joyride. She didn't have a key. I had the only set of keys in my hand, which meant she didn't drive it away. It meant she had it taken. I had to take an Uber home. It cost me $45 that I didn't really have to spare. The whole ride I stared out the window trying to rehearse what I was going to say. I was trying to be rational. Maybe it was repossessed? But that was impossible. I paid cash for it. Maybe it was towed? But I was parked legally. When the Uber pulled up to the house, the lights were on. The TV was blaring. It looked so normal. It looked like a home. I walked up the driveway, staring at the empty space where my Civic should have been. I took a deep breath, inhaling the night air, trying to slow my heart rate down because my chest felt like it was going to explode. I unlocked the front door, and there she was, sitting on the couch, eating a bowl of cereal, watching a rerun of some reality dating show. She looked peaceful. She looked like a woman who had just solved a big problem. And that's when I knew. The war wasn't coming. The war had already started, and she had fired the first shot while I was saving lives. So I'm standing in the entryway, my nursing bag still heavy on my shoulder, and the smell of the house hits me. It's that familiar mix of Glade plug-ins trying to cover up something stale, like old laundry and secrets. And the sound of the TV is just loud enough to be annoying, some game show host screaming about a new refrigerator. I look at her, and she's just calmly lifting a spoon of cornflakes to her mouth. No guilt, no panic. She doesn't look like a woman who just committed a major crime against her own child. She looks like she's bored. I mean, honestly, my brain couldn't even process the level of nonchalance. I'm vibrating with adrenaline. My hands are shaking so bad I have to clench them into fists just to stop the tremors, and she's worried about milk dripping on her chin. I didn't scream. That's the weird part. And you think you'd scream, right? But when the shock is that deep, your voice just kind of dies in your throat. So I walked over to the TV, picked up the remote, and turned it off. The silence that filled the room was heavy, like the air pressure dropped 10 degrees. She finally looks at me, sighs this big dramatic sigh, and asks me what my problem is. Like I'm the one being unreasonable for interrupting her show. I asked her, very slowly, where my car was. I didn't say Civic. I said my car. I wanted to emphasize possession. And get this, she rolls her eyes. She literally rolls her eyes at me like I'm a teenager asking for an allowance increase. She waves her hand in this vague gesture towards the window and says, essentially, that she handled it. I froze. Handled it? What does that even mean? She takes another bite of cereal and tells me that she sold it. Just like that. Like she was telling me she sold an old lamp at a yard sale. She said a friend of a friend gave her a good deal on it, cash in hand, and that I shouldn't worry because she used the money to pay off some things we were behind on. My knees actually buckled. I had to grab the back of the dining chair to keep from hitting the floor. I'm staring at her, trying to make the math work in my head. That car was worth $12,000, minimum. It was my freedom. It was my way to work. I asked her how she could possibly sell a car that wasn't hers. The title was in my name. It was in my fireproof box in my closet. And this is where the conversation shifted from bad parenting to criminal insanity. She looks me dead in the eye and tells me that she found the key to my box in my desk drawer. She said she took the title, signed my name on the back, and handed it over to the guy. She said it so casually, implying that since she's my mother, my signature is basically her signature. She actually said, and I'm paraphrasing the sentiment here, but the vibe was crystal clear, that since she gave birth to me, she owns everything I have. She viewed my property as community property. Have you ever felt your love for someone turn into hate in a single second? It's not a slow fade. It's a snap, like a rubber band breaking against your skin. I stood there listening to her explain that she got $4,000 for it. $4,000. She sold a $12,000 car for $4,000 because she needed the cash that day. That's crackhead pricing. That's, I need to hit the casino in the next hour pricing. And then she tried to flip it on me. This is the part that really messed with my head. She started getting defensive, saying that I'm selfish for hoarding a car when the family is struggling. She said I could just take the bus to the hospital. She said the bus builds character. I'm looking at this woman, and I'm realizing she doesn't know where I work. She doesn't know that the bus doesn't run at 11 p.m. when my shift ends. She doesn't know that a 2-hour commute means I sleep 4 hours a night instead of 6. She doesn't know, and worse, she doesn't care. To her, I am just an obstacle between her and the slot machine. I asked her where the money was, the $4,000. She hesitated. For the first time, she looked a little shifty. She looked down at her bowl and mumbled that she invested it. Invested. That's addict speak for, I lost it. I felt this cold wave wash over me. It started in my stomach and went up to my throat. I wanted to throw up. I realized in that moment that there was no money. The car was gone. The cash was gone. And if I didn't do something drastic, my career was going to be gone too. I tried to give her one last chance. This was the reluctant executioner in me. I wanted her to fix it. I wanted her to say, "Oh my God, what have I done? Let me call him back. Let me fix this." So I asked her quietly to give me the contact info for the guy she sold it to. I told her we could call the police and tell them it was a mistake. And she laughed. A short, sharp, bitter laugh. She told me to grow up. She said if I called the police, I would be ruining this family over a stupid piece of metal. She said if I loved her, I would let it go. She basically dared me to do something about it. She was banking on the fact that I was the good daughter. She was banking on the fact that I had spent my whole life covering for her, cleaning up her messes, and apologizing for things I didn't do. She thought I was too weak to pull the trigger. She turned the TV back on. She dismissed me. She went back to her game show, secure in the knowledge that I would just go to my room, cry into my pillow, and figure out the bus schedule in the morning. That was the mistake. That moment, her turning up the volume while I stood there with my life in ruins, was the switch. I felt something inside me die. Honestly, it was the part of me that was a daughter. It just withered up and blew away. And in its place, something else woke up. It was cold and logical and incredibly angry. And I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table. I just turned around and walked down the hallway to my bedroom. I closed the door and locked it. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my hands. They were still shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. She had stolen my property. She had forged my signature. That's grand larceny. That's forgery. Those aren't family disputes. Those are felonies. I looked at the empty spot on my bookshelf where my fireproof box used to be. She had violated my privacy, my trust, and my financial future. I realized I had a choice. I could be the victim, take the bus, and let her drain me dry until I was just as empty as she was. Or I could treat her like what she actually was, a criminal who had targeted me. I took a deep breath. The air in my room felt different, sharper, and I reached into my bag and pulled out my iPad. I wasn't going to sleep. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to build a case. She wanted to play games? Fine. She gambled my car. Now I was going to gamble her freedom. And unlike her, I don't play unless I know I'm going to win. I opened my laptop, and the blue light of the screen illuminated the room. It was time to go to work. The house was quiet now. The TV was finally off, and I could hear the heavy, rhythmic snoring coming from her bedroom down the hall. It was the sound of someone who slept perfectly fine because they didn't have a conscience to keep them awake. I sat there in the blue glow of my laptop screen, my door locked, a chair wedged under the handle just in case. I wasn't Sarah the daughter anymore. I was Sarah the investigator. And honestly, the scariest part wasn't what I was about to find, it was how easy it was to find it. You have to understand, my mother is not a criminal mastermind, she's an addict. And addicts are sloppy. They prioritize the fix over the cover-up. She thought because she was mom, she didn't need to hide her tracks because I would never actually look for them. She relied on the hierarchy of the family to protect her from scrutiny. But that hierarchy was gone. I started with the digital trail. See, we shared a family iCloud account from years ago. I had set it up for her back when she got her first iPhone because she didn't know how to save photos of the dog. She never figured out how to unlink her devices. So, I logged into the Find My network first. I wanted to see if the iPad, the one she used for her games, was online. It was. It was sitting on her nightstand, charging. But because of the sync settings, her browser history, and her recent emails were accessible from my laptop if I knew where to look. And I knew exactly where to look. I opened the shared email folder. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. I felt like I was invading her privacy, which is ironic, considering she had just sold my primary mode of transportation to a stranger. I scrolled past the spam, the newsletters, the overdue bill notifications. And then, I saw it. An email from her bank, time-stamped 4:45 p.m. that afternoon. I clicked it open. And I'm not kidding when I say I stopped breathing for a solid 10 seconds. It wasn't just a notification, it was a transfer confirmation. I leaned in, reading the text on the screen, needing to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It read, "Transaction alert, deposit of $4,000 via mobile check deposit. Source, Joe's You Pull It and Scrap. Memo, 20 Civic." My stomach dropped through the floor. Joe's You Pull It. She didn't sell it to a driver. She didn't sell it to a dealership. She sold a perfectly running 2020 Honda Civic to a scrapyard, a place where they rip cars apart for parts. She had sold my freedom to be crushed into a cube, but the email trail didn't stop there. 2 minutes later, literally 2 minutes, there was another notification. Transaction confirmed. Transfer of $4,000 to casino wallet/Lucky Spin AP. Status, complete. I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to wrap my head around the timeline. In the span of 120 seconds, the money was gone. She hadn't even bought groceries with it. She hadn't paid the electric bill. It went from the scrapyard's bank account straight into the void of a slot machine algorithm. Have you ever looked at a number on a screen and realized it was the price tag someone put on your relationship? $4,000. That was the exchange rate. But I knew the digital trail wasn't enough. Digital stuff can be argued away in court. Oh, I didn't know. Or, it was an accident. I needed something physical. I needed the paper. I needed the signature. I looked at the clock. 2:15 a.m. I had to go into the lion's den. I took off my shoes so my socks would be silent on the hardwood. I unlocked my door, painfully slowly, timing the click of the lock with her snores so she wouldn't hear it. The hallway was pitch black. I crept past her bedroom door. The smell of stale wine was wafting out. I held my breath and moved into the kitchen. My mom has this junk drawer by the fridge. You know the one. It's full of batteries, rubber bands, takeout menus, and unpaid bills. It's her filing system. If she had any paperwork from the sale, it would be in there. I opened the drawer. It squeaked. I froze. Silence from the bedroom. Just the snoring. I pulled out my phone and used the screen's light as a flashlight. I started digging. Old receipts. A broken screwdriver. A coupon for pizza expired in 2019. And then, or shoved all the way to the back. Underneath a pile of losing lottery tickets, I found a yellow carbon copy slip. It was wrinkled, like she had balled it up and then smoothed it out again. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely unfold it. The paper felt greasy. It was a bill of sale from Joe's You Pull It. It was crude, handwritten in blue ballpoint pen. I shone my light on the bottom of the page, and that's when the ringing in my ears started. A high-pitched whine that drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. There was a line for seller's signature, and on that line, in my mother's jagged, loopy handwriting, was my name, Sarah J. Miller. She hadn't just sold the car. She had impersonated me. She had forged my signature on a legal document to transfer the title. I stared at that signature. It looked like a mockery of me. It was her hand, but my identity. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry in the hot, fiery way. I felt cold. I felt clinical. I was looking at a felony. This wasn't a family dispute. This was grand larceny and forgery in the second degree. I pulled out my phone and took a high-resolution photo of the document. Then I took another one. Then I flipped it over and took a picture of the back. I folded the yellow slip and put it in my pocket. I wasn't going to leave it there for her to destroy. I was taking the evidence. I crept back to my room, locked the door, and sat on the floor. I felt like I was going to throw up, but I forced myself to breathe. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. I looked at the photo on my phone. Basically, she had handed me the gun. She thought I wouldn't use it because I was her daughter. She thought the mother card trumped the penal code. But sitting there in the dark, clutching that stolen piece of paper, I realized something. She had broken the contract first. When she signed my name, she stopped being my mother and started being a thief. And thieves don't get to come to Thanksgiving dinner. Thieves go to jail. I opened a new folder on my laptop. I named it Case File. I dragged the screenshots of the bank transfers and the photo of the forgery into it. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. I had work to do. I had to prepare the trap. I didn't sleep that night. I mean, how could I? I spent the remaining hours of darkness organizing the files on my laptop and staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the conversation I was about to have. But not the conversation with her. I was done talking to her. By 6 a.m., the sun was starting to bleed through the blinds, painting the room in this dull gray light. I felt weirdly energized. It wasn't the caffeine kind of energy. It was that cold, metallic focus you get during a code blue in the ICU. The patient is dying, panic is useless, procedure is everything. My mother was the patient. And I was about to pull the plug. I showered, dressed in my scrubs, not because I had work, but because I wanted to look professional. I wanted to look like a contributing member of society, not a hysterical daughter. I called an Uber to the precinct. When I walked into the police station, it smelled like stale coffee and floor wax. It was quiet. I walked up to the front desk, and there was this older sergeant sitting there, looking like he was counting the minutes until retirement. And here is where it gets tricky. See, usually, when you try to report a family member for theft, the police try to brush you off. They call it a civil matter. They tell you to take it to small claims court. I knew this. I had done my research while the rest of the world was sleeping, so I didn't go in there crying about my stolen car. I went in there with a folder. I approached the desk and told him, very calmly, that I needed to file a report for identity theft and forgery. He looked at me over his glasses, kind of bored, and asked for the details. He started giving me the standard speech about how if I gave the person the keys, it's not theft. I stopped him. I opened my folder. I laid out the printed screenshot of the bill of sale with the forged signature. I laid out my driver's license next to it so he could compare the signatures. I told him explicitly that I did not give permission, I did not sign the title, and that my mother had impersonated me to defraud a business and steal a vehicle valued over $10,000. You could literally see the shift in his face. He went from bored bureaucrat to cop. He picked up the paper. He looked at the signature. He looked at mine. He realized this wasn't just a dispute over who gets the car on weekends. This was a felony paper trail. He asked me if I wanted to press charges. He actually warned me. He said, "You know, once we start this, it's out of your hands. The district attorney takes over. You can't just say sorry and make it go away." Have you ever had to look a stranger in the eye and sign the warrant for your own mother's destruction? I didn't hesitate. Not for a second. I told him to proceed. I gave him the address of the scrapyard. I gave him the address of our house. We set it up for that evening. I told him she would be home around dinner time. I wanted her to be comfortable. I wanted her to feel safe. He said officers would come by to investigate the report, which is police code for, "We are coming to ask her questions she can't answer without incriminating herself." I walked out of that station feeling 10 pounds lighter. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait. The rest of the day was an exercise in psychological warfare. I took an Uber back to the house. When I walked in, she was up. She was making coffee, humming to herself. She looked relieved. See? In her mind, the storm had passed. I hadn't screamed at her this morning. I hadn't called the cops immediately. So, she assumed she had won. She assumed I had accepted my role as the doormat. She actually turned to me and asked if I had figured out the bus schedule yet. She said it with this smug little smirk, like she was teaching me a valuable life lesson about resilience. And honestly, my first instinct was to scream. I wanted to throw the coffee pot at the wall. I wanted to tell her that I had just signed her arrest warrant. But I didn't. Instead, I channeled every ounce of self-control I possessed. I looked at her, forced a tired smile, and said she was right. I told her I looked up the route and it wasn't that bad. I told her I was just going to pick up some extra shifts to cover the money I lost. You should have seen her face. When she practically glowed, she patted my arm, the same arm she had metaphorically broken the night before, and told me she knew I would do the right thing. She said she was proud of me for not being dramatic. I went to my room and packed a small bag. Just essentials. My uniform, my laptop, my chargers. Because I knew once the sun went down, this house wasn't going to be a home anymore. It was going to be a crime scene. I sat on my bed and waited. I listened to her moving around the kitchen, clanging pots and pans. She was cooking a roast. She was actually making a celebration dinner, probably to thank me for being so understanding. I just checked my watch. 4 p.m., 2 hours to go. I felt like a sniper waiting on a rooftop. The target was in sight. The wind was calm. All I had to do was wait for the green light. The smell of rosemary and garlic was filling the kitchen, which should have been comforting, right? It's the smell of Sunday dinner, of family, of safety. But honestly, sitting there at the dining room table, watching her carve the roast beef, the smell just made my stomach turn. It was like smelling perfume in a funeral home. It was trying too hard to mask the reality of what was happening. I sat there, pushing my peas around my plate with a fork, trying to keep my hand steady. The clock on the wall was ticking so loud it sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. Tick, tick, tick. Every second was bringing the squad car closer to our driveway, and she had absolutely no idea. She was in a fantastic mood. I mean, she was practically vibrating with relief. You have to understand, in her mind, the crisis was over. She had done the hard thing, selling the car, and I had seemingly accepted it. She thought she had successfully reset the board. She was talking a mile a minute, telling me about this new recipe she found on Facebook, and how she was thinking about repainting the living room a nice sage green. It was surreal. I'm sitting there knowing that in less than 20 minutes, men with guns and handcuffs are going to walk through that door, and she's debating paint swatches. Have you ever watched someone you love smile, knowing you are the reason that smile is about to disappear forever? It's a sick feeling. It's this mix of guilt and power and absolute dread. Part of me wanted to scream at her. Part of me wanted to say, "Run, pack a bag and run." Because despite everything, despite the theft, the lying, the gaslighting, she was still my mom. How? And the idea of seeing her in a cage made my chest ache. But then she started talking about the car again, and this is where the guilt evaporated. She put down her fork, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and looked at me with this condescending pity. She started lecturing me. Basically, she said that I needed to stop being so materialistic. She told me that the car was just a crutch, and that me taking the bus was going to be a good spiritual journey for me. She actually used the words spiritual journey. She said she did me a favor by getting rid of it. She claimed the insurance was too high anyway, and that I should be thanking her for simplifying my life. She was rewriting history in real time, painting herself not as a thief, but as a wise matriarch helping her stumbling daughter. I listened to her justify a felony as a parenting decision. I watched her pour herself another glass of wine, bought, I assume, with the change left over from my car, and I felt the last lingering thread of attachment snap. I decided to give her the last chance. I needed to know. I needed to be 100% sure that there was no remorse buried under that addiction. I looked up from my plate and asked her, very quietly, if she felt bad about signing my name. I asked her if her hand shook when she committed the forgery. And you know what she did? She laughed. She waved her hand in the air like she was swatting away a fly. She told me to stop being so dramatic. She said it's just a signature, it's just ink on paper. She said since I'm her daughter, my name belongs to her anyway. She literally said that she gave me my name, so she has the right to use it however she sees fit. That was it. That was the moment. She didn't see me as a person with rights. She saw me as an extension of herself. A limb she could cut off if she needed to feed the rest of the body. There was no remorse. There was only entitlement. I nodded slowly. I didn't say anything else. I just took a sip of my water and looked out the front window. The sun had gone down. The street was dark. And then, I saw it. It started as a faint blue flash against the living room wall, then a red one, then blue again. No siren. They had cut the siren so they wouldn't spook her. Just the silent, rhythmic strobe of the light bar reflecting off the neighbor's house across the street. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to break out. She didn't notice. She was too busy cutting another slice of beef. Then came the sound. The heavy slam of car doors. Not one, but two. She paused, knife midair. She frowned. She asked me who would be visiting this late. She sounded annoyed, like someone was interrupting her perfect victory dinner. I didn't answer. I just pushed my chair back and stood up. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite, friendly ring. It was a sharp, authoritative press. Then a heavy knock. Bang, bang, bang. "Police, open up!" The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a special effect. She dropped the knife. It clattered onto the china plate, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. She looked at the door, then she looked at me. Her eyes were wide, confused. She looked like a trapped animal. She asked me, in this small, trembling voice, why the police were here. She asked if I had been in an accident. She still didn't get it. She couldn't conceive of a world where her actions had consequences. I didn't say a word. I just walked past her. Past the roast beef, past the wine, and towards the front door. She scrambled up from her chair, knocking it over. She was saying, "Sarah! Sarah, what is going on?" I reached for the doorknob. The metal was cold under my hand. I looked back at her one last time. She was standing in the hallway clutching her napkin, looking small and frail and terrified. For a split second, I wanted to stop. I wanted to tell them it was a mistake. But then I remembered the text message. Transfer to Lucky Spin slots. I remembered the bus schedule. I remembered the forgery. I turned the lock. I swung the door open, and the cold night air rushed in, mixing with the warm, heavy scent of the roast beef. It was such a jarring contrast, the domestic warmth behind me and the sterile, blue-lit authority in front of me. Standing on the porch were two officers. One was the sergeant I had met earlier, the older guy with the tired eyes who had warned me about the point of no return. The other was a younger uniform, looking stiff and ready for anything. They took up the entire frame of the doorway. And here is where it gets crazy. My mother, who had been trembling just seconds before, suddenly shape-shifted. I mean, literally, her posture changed, her face softened, and she put on this mask of the confused but helpful suburban mom. She pushed past me, wiping her hands on her apron, and she actually smiled at them. She asked them if everything was all right, if there was trouble in the neighborhood, keeping her voice pitched high and innocent. She was trying to control the frame. She was banking on the fact that she was a middle-aged woman in a nice house, and therefore, she couldn't possibly be the suspect. The sergeant didn't smile back. He just stepped into the foyer, forcing her to take a step back. He didn't ask about the neighborhood. He asked her to confirm her full legal name. She blinked, confused by the aggression, but she gave it. And then, she tried to pivot. She tried to offer them coffee. She literally gestured to the dining room and said we were just sitting down to dinner, acting like this was a social call that had just gone slightly awkward. The sergeant ignored the offer. He looked her dead in the eye and stated very clearly, and that they were there regarding the theft and illegal sale of a 2020 Honda Civic registered to her daughter. The air in the room just vanished. And this is the part that still haunts me. She didn't look at them. She looked at me, and she laughed. It was this nervous, bubbling sound. She turned back to the officers and basically told them that there had been a misunderstanding. She explained, with this patronizing confidence, that kids these days get confused about paperwork. She claimed that we had decided together to sell the car to pay off some family debts, and that I must have just gotten emotional about it and called them by mistake. She was gaslighting the police. In front of me. She looked at me, her eyes widening, signaling me to play along. She was silently commanding me to nod to say, "Yes, officer, I'm sorry," when I'm just a silly girl who made a mistake. She was betting her entire life on my submission. She was betting that I was still the daughter who was afraid of rocking the boat. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, leaning against the wall, my arms crossed, staring at her. The sergeant looked at me too. He asked, very directly, if I had given permission for the vehicle to be sold. I shook my head. Once. A slow, deliberate no. You could see the crack in her mask. It was like watching glass shatter in slow motion. Her smile dropped, and her face twisted into something ugly. She started stammering, telling the officers that I was lying, that I was ungrateful, that I didn't understand how family finances worked. But the sergeant wasn't interested in a debate. He pulled out a piece of paper from his clipboard. It was the copy of the bill of sale I had provided. He held it up. He asked her, point blank, if she had signed the name Sarah J. Miller on this document. She froze. Her eyes darted from the paper to the sergeant's face to the door, looking for an exit that didn't exist. She tried to lie. She tried to say it was a proxy signature, that I had told her to sign it. The sergeant cut her off. He told her that the scrapyard owner had already been contacted and had confirmed she presented herself as the owner of the vehicle. He told her that falsely signing a title is forgery in the second degree, and selling a vehicle that doesn't belong to you is grand larceny. And then the younger officer reached for his belt. The sound of the handcuffs unclipping from the case was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Click, snap. Have you ever seen a parent shrink? Not physically, but spiritually? In that second, she wasn't the giant who controlled my life. She was just a scared, pathetic woman getting caught in a lie. She started backing away. She bumped into the hallway table, knocking over a vase. It shattered, but nobody looked at it. She was shaking her head, putting her hands up, basically begging them not to do this. She started bargaining. She told them she could get the money back. She told them she would call the guy right now. She promised she would fix it. The sergeant told her to turn around and place her hands behind her back. She didn't listen. She lunged toward me. Not to attack me, but to grab me. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin, and she started screaming. She wasn't screaming, "I love you." She was screaming that I was ruining her life. She was screaming that I was a traitor. She shouted that after everything she did for me, feeding me, clothing me, I was going to send her to jail over a car. She was weaponizing her motherhood. She was trying to make me feel like the criminal. I pulled my arm away. I stepped back. The officers moved in. They didn't tackle her, but they were firm. And they grabbed her wrists and forced them behind her back. She let out this wail, this primal broken sound, when the steel cuffs ratcheted shut. Zaht, zaht. You have the right to remain silent. The Mirandizing began. The words flowed over her, but I don't think she heard them. She was hyperventilating. She was looking at me with pure hatred. If looks could kill, I would have dropped dead on that hallway runner. They started marching her toward the door. She was stumbling, her feet dragging on the floor, her nice dinner blouse rumpled. The neighbors were already out. I could see them through the open door. Mrs. Higgins from next door was standing on her porch in her bathrobe. The guy walking his dog had stopped. They were all watching the nice lady who lived at 404 Oak Street being hauled out like a common criminal. As they guided her past me, she stopped. She planted her feet and refused to move. The officer had to tug on her arm. She looked me right in the face. Her mascara was running. Her hair was a mess. She looked desperate and angry and terrified. And she finally spoke to me. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked, with this venomous hiss, why I was doing this. She said, "I'm your mother. You owe me. Ma, how could you choose a car over your own blood?" Basically, even in handcuffs, she was trying to win the argument. She genuinely believed that her title of mother gave her the right to cannibalize my life. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had stolen my savings, my peace of mind, and my trust. I looked at the addict who had sold my freedom for a few hours of dopamine. I took a half step closer, just close enough so she could hear me over the static of the police radio. I looked her dead in the eye and delivered the only words I had left for her. "You bet against the house, Mom, and you lost." The officer pulled her forward. She tried to scream something else, but they guided her down the porch steps. I stood in the doorway and watched. I watched them guide her head down so she wouldn't bump it on the doorframe of the cruiser. I watched the heavy door slam shut, sealing her inside the cage she had built for herself. The lights flashed, red, blue, illuminating the whole street. The sergeant lingered on the porch for a second. He looked at me, gave a curt nod, and said they would be in touch regarding the statement. Then he turned and walked away. The cruiser pulled out. The sirens stayed off, but the lights kept spinning, reflecting off the trees, the parked cars, the faces of the neighbors. And then they turned the corner and were gone. The street fell silent. The neighbors slowly went back inside, whispering to each other, their phones already lighting up to spread the gossip. I stood there for a long time. The cold air was biting through my scrubs, but I didn't feel it. I felt clear. I turned around and walked back into the house. The roast beef was still sitting on the table, cold now. The wine glass was still full. The shattered vase was still on the floor. It was a mess. But for the first time in my life, it was a mess I didn't have to clean up. I walked over to the table, picked up her glass of wine, walked to the kitchen sink, and poured it down the drain. The silence that follows a police raid isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It's the kind of silence that rings in your ears. I spent that first night sitting on the floor of the living room, packing boxes. I knew I couldn't stay there. Even though she was in a holding cell, the house felt contaminated. It felt like the walls were soaking up the years of lies and anxiety, and I needed to get out before I suffocated. I didn't visit her in jail. I didn't bail her out. And honestly, that was the hardest part. The daughter part of my brain kept screaming that I was abandoning her, that she was cold and scared and alone. But the survivor part of my brain, the part that had just saved my own life, reminded me that she was in a warm cell with 3 meals a day, which was more security than she had given me when she stole my car. And the legal fallout was swift and brutal. Basically, because the amount was over a certain threshold, the district attorney didn't play around. She was charged with grand larceny and forgery in the 2nd degree. And here is where it gets worse for her. The scrapyard owner, Joe, wasn't just going to take the loss. He was furious. He had paid cash for a stolen vehicle, which meant the police seized the car as evidence, so he was out the car and the $4,000. He sued her immediately. Since she obviously didn't have the cash, it was sitting in the casino's bank account. He put a lien on the house. The very house where she had felt so safe eating her roast beef was now legally compromised. The family reaction was exactly what you'd expect. The next morning, my phone blew up. Aunts I hadn't spoken to in 5 years were calling me, leaving voicemails that ranged from, "How could you do this to your mother?" to, "You need to drop the charges right now." They called me a traitor. They said I was airing dirty laundry. They said family solves problems at the kitchen table, not in a courtroom. I didn't argue with them. I didn't try to explain the years of emotional abuse or the financial draining. I just did one simple thing. I took a screenshot of the bank transfer, the one showing the money going from the scrapyard to Lucky Spin slots in 2 minutes flat, and I sent it to the family group chat. No caption, no explanation, just the receipt. The group chat went silent. Nobody replied. Because how do you defend that? You can't defend a mother choosing a slot machine over her child's livelihood. That single image killed their moral high ground instantly. They stopped calling. They realized that defending her meant defending the addiction, and nobody wanted to be that exposed. Have you ever noticed that people who tell you to be the bigger person are usually the ones who have never had to shrink themselves to survive? As for the car, I got it back. It took about 3 weeks of bureaucratic hell. It sat in an impound lot as evidence until the preliminary hearing. When I finally went to pick it up, it looked different. It was dusty, and there was a grease mark on the driver's seat from the tow truck driver. But when I sat in it, when I gripped that steering wheel, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: ownership. It was mine again, not just legally, but spiritually. It was no longer a vessel for her greed. It was my chariot out of hell. I moved out that same weekend. I found a small studio apartment near the hospital. It wasn't much, just a room with a kitchenette and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. But it was mine. The rent was high and money was tight, but I didn't care. I remember the first night in my new place. I was lying on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford a bed frame yet. It was completely silent. No TV blaring, no smell of stale wine, no footsteps in the hallway making me flinch. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the anxiety to hit. I waited for the guilt, but it never came. Instead, I fell asleep. I slept for 10 hours straight. It was the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who doesn't have to lock their door against their own family. My mother eventually took a plea deal. She got 3 years of probation, mandatory gambling addiction counseling, and restitution orders that will garnish her Social Security checks until the day she dies. She lost the house. The lien and the legal fees were too much, and she had to sell it at a loss just to stay afloat. She lives in a small assisted living facility now, funded by the state. I haven't spoken to her since the night the police took her away. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she understands. I wonder if she sits in her room and realizes that the $4,000 wasn't worth it. I wonder if she misses me, or if she just misses the ATM I used to be. But then I look at my bank account, and the number is stable. I look at my car keys sitting by the door, and they are exactly where I left them. I realize that revenge isn't always about making the other person suffer. Sometimes, revenge is just refusing to suffer anymore. It's drawing a line in the sand and saying, "You do not pass." She sold my car for a chance to win a jackpot. But in the end, I was the one who walked away with the prize. I got my life back. And that is a payout no casino could ever match.